wherever you are. Make it Truth Frequency Radio.
Welcome to Spirit's Journey, coming to you live on Truth Frequency Radio and simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio. Your hosts are Patrick and Catherine Andrews.
Join us each week as we explore a wide range of metaphysical topics such as dreams, astrology, intuitive readings, and life purpose. You'll receive practical guidance so that you can live your most awesome life.
Learn more about what we do at intuitiveschool.com and connect with us on Facebook at Spirit's Journey Radio. Hello and welcome to Spirit's Journey. We are coming to you live on Truth Frequency Radio. You can also find us on Oneness Talk Radio, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and TalkStream Live. And we are here in the Heartland holding the energy for spiritual truth and awareness. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Catherine. Welcome, everyone.
So this weekend, you'll be able to see me at the What's Your Genre Book and Psychic Festival. That's July 26th, 27th, and 28th. It's at the Best Western Inn of the Ozarks. You can find out more at the Ozark Mountain Publishing website at ozarkmt.com. Again, that's ozarkmt.com. I'm going to be speaking Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So I'll be speaking on wisdom from the Akasha, sound vibrational healing, and more, and also dream adventures and other subconscious experiences. So today we are excited to have with us a special guest, David Matthews. He's the heart health guy. In 2008, David was diagnosed with a severe coronary artery disease. He was given an arterial stent and told to return later for 2 additional stents. When he left the hospital, he was told by the doctor that he and his staff would be there when he needed them the next time. And his first thought was, oh, here we go. I'm following my father down the slope to an early death. So he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to go back. So the next time he determined then and there that he would heal himself of this deadly diagnosis. He learned the actions to take. He learned what his passion, that he had a passion for sharing what he learned. And he has lived over 10 years now as a living biological laboratory. So, David, welcome.
Well, thank you, Patrick. It's good to be here.
Awesome. So, David, since we're just kind of getting started here, can you give us a little bit of your background and share with us what led you to become such a proponent of what you describe as whole food, plant-based nutrition?
Yeah, I'll do that, Patrick. I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you and Catherine for inviting me today. My journey is starting back about the time you referred to. I had spent about a year having severe chest pain. I knew my father had died at a very young age, and at the time truly believed that genetics played a huge role in whether or not I would develop eventually coronary artery disease myself. And indeed, that year I had no health insurance and could not go to the hospital to have anything checked out, but I knew that there was a real problem that was going on. I remember I had construction. I was a home builder. Also had a business doing decorative concrete coatings, and I had crews out working all the time. And I was out in the heat, and I would put myself under some stresses, and it hurt so bad I would have to go kind of hide around corners so people wouldn't see what was going on, and that went on for a long time. It was quite a challenging period of time. Well, one day, somehow I finagled a health insurance policy, and that health insurance policy allowed me to go to the hospital. I wasn't looking forward to it, but I ended up in the hospital. It wasn't long after getting to the hospital, they rushed me by ambulance from one hospital to the big city hospital, where they did the scan of my heart and determined indeed I had severe coronary artery disease, and they were able to put in 1 stent at the time, and they determined that it would be too much to do the other 2 stents at that time, so they asked me to come back at a time later. Well, I decided not to to go back at that time, because in the meantime, I discovered a few things. When I left that hospital, I left truly determined to not become a statistic. Most people that are diagnosed with coronary artery disease, they experience a progression. They experience many different medications. They experience many different interventions, be it further stenting or open heart surgery, these kind of things. And they have a limited period of time and a declining health. I didn't think that was going to be required, but I didn't know exactly what to do. I dabbled in vegetarianism back in college, and back when my wife married me, I was 110 pounds. I'd eaten only vegetables, but I also ate many other things that didn't really go to plant-based. So I still developed the disease. So I went somewhere and met a guy, without going into really a lot of details there, that wrote down a name on a slip of paper and asked me to go back to my computer and Google it. And this was a word, Esselstyn, Esselstyn. So I went to the hotel. I was actually out of town at the time, got on my computer, and lo and behold, discovered a fellow named Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. I read about his research, taking a group of individuals that appeared to be far worse off than I was. They called them the Walking Dead. And he took them at Cleveland Clinic from the coronary part into integrative medicine and put them on strictly plant-based nutrition with very specific guidelines. And this has been about 25 years, give or take. And to this day, with the exception of only one of them, who subsequently returned back to eating a certain way, they all have survived and have had zero additional cardiac events. They remained very compliant on a very natural way of eating that is really eaten by most people in the world in the first place anyway, that don't experience these chronic diseases such as heart disease. Well, I immediately went up and visited with him, and he trained me what to do. And little by little, I dropped from about 210 pounds to 150 pounds over the course of a few months. And it felt like $1 million. The pain was subsided to the degree that I no longer felt the need for cardiac intervention, did not feel the need to continue taking the medications, and I got better and better. Years go by. I was alone. Didn't know anybody else that ate like I did, which is a challenge that we'll talk about today. So little by little, I thought, well, I'm feeling so good. Surely I can eat a piece of chicken, or surely I can eat a piece of whatever. And one thing led to another, and I never returned back to the way I'd been eating prior. My diet was still very moderated, but over the next few years, I started gaining a little weight back, started hurting again. It led to a more recent event. A couple of years ago, I had a heart attack, and I went to the hospital, and they were about to send me once again to a larger hospital, this time for open heart surgery. And I got thinking, David, this was not necessary. You knew what to do. You knew moderation was not going to be your answer. And now look at your situation. You're in pain, and they want to cut your chest open. I left the hospital against medical advice. There was a term there called the AMA, against medical advice. And I returned to 100% compliance. Again, now it's 2 years later. Far better off than I was, but in the interim, the progression of my heart disease had been consistently getting worse. So now I'm working up from a little bit worse condition than I would have had to have been had I stayed compliant. So that's why I'm here today talking. That's why one more thing I'd like to say is I found a few years ago, and the only job I've had, I was in people's homes, about 3 persons' homes every day as a salesperson, and I found disease everywhere. And I discussed what I was doing for mine, and I never felt so much receptivity. People leaned in. They wanted to know. So I got the idea then that I wanted to help people. And that's where I am today. That's why we're having this talk.
Mm.
So, David, it's an amazing story, and I wanted to ask you because I know so many people end up in the hospital for different reasons, and there is such an overwhelming fear cloud, and strong will on the part of, doctors and the whole medical system for people to follow their plan, and they put this fear in people to follow their plan. So I'm curious, what happened within you that you did not succumb to the fear and were able to break free of, that whole cloud of fear and coercion that so many people fall prey to when they end up in the hospital?
Well, I've always been pretty strong mentally and spiritually in regards believing that certain things are possible that don't appear readily possible to the vast majority of people. I also, in my studies over those interim years, which was plenty of studies of research and of Dr. Esselstyn and many other doctors who were on the same page, that if one strictly follows a very get a wide range of food from whole food, plant-based nutrition, and gets plenty of variety, that you will lead yourself back to a state of health. And never was the doctor designed there, especially within cardiology, to lead you back into health. It was all symptomatic relief, which does some good. Everybody would love to avoid pain. So there are medications and there are surgeries that can help get you out of the symptomatic problems that you're experiencing, but you're not healing. And I always believed that healing was, when I learned what I learned, the fear went away. When I observed what was happening within my own body by eating properly and not eating anything that I knew was going to damage the endothelium, which is the inner lining of the arteries, and I was seeing the results, my confidence level just blossomed. And even though I went through a period of downfall, if you will, backsliding, if you will, and I got far worse, and I'm still now in an upper progress of mending, I'm still not afraid. I believe that with all my heart, that doing these right things for myself will do so much more than just physically, and so much more than just heal my heart. And will do so much more for listeners or those that are facing what I'm facing. The upside is enormous to following whole food plant-based.
So it's really interesting that you're talking about the benefits of the plant-based diet, because that reminds me of a book called The China Study, and there's been multiple studies of cultures where the people didn't really eat a lot of meat, and so this one study was done in China because they were mostly a plant-based diet at that time. They might have occasional fish, and we actually have a friend who came from China, and one time we were eating a meal, and she commented that the amount of, I think it might have been chicken or fish that we had, but the amount of one serving for one person was about as much as an entire family would eat for the entire week. So they might get a serving of meat for that week, and then they'd split it up among the whole family. So in this particular study, they were actually researching cancer, and they were describing the results that as they started to introduce animal products into the diet, that the cancer cells would start to grow. And then as they started to, I think the threshold was about 20%, they could kind of hold it steady. And then as they dropped the animal products down to about 5% of the diet or less, then they could actually start reversing the cancer development. And so they actually, in the laboratory, they were actually able to turn that on and off, just like what you're describing with your heart symptoms, just by altering the diet. So they were able to switch on the cancer cell development and then reverse it based on the kind of diet that they're eating. So it's really interesting because there does seem to be this kind of a universal, the studies out there's a lot of them that seem to point to the same idea. I myself am not vegetarian, but I do reduce the amount of animal products and stuff like that. I eat mostly like fish and stuff like that. But I've definitely noticed a difference, and as I progress, I do seem to like crave more of a whole plant kind of a diet, like what you're describing.
Yeah, I am so glad you brought up the China study. That was one of my favorite readings in the early years, and I refer back to it quite often. And at the deep, oh my goodness, in large studies of populations and their health, it was found in China that the people out in the countryside that ate in the manner that you were describing not only had next to no cancer, they had no diabetes, very little stroke, no obesity, no other vascular diseases, and no heart disease, or it was very rare, put it that way. Very rare were there heart disease found. But over the years, the Western diet, the standard American diet, which is sometimes known as SAD, it has found its way around the whole earth. And there are cultures in this world. China was one, Okinawa in Japan was another, the Hunzas, the Vilcabambans in Ecuador, that they too, when they were first studied, were found to have none of these chronic diseases that exist in the West, particularly in the United States. So it was found that if you look for things in common, in many other cultures, that's just to name a few, what was in common was the focus was on whole grains, legumes, beans of all kinds, vegetables, the lots of deep green leafy vegetables, and fruits. And there was little to no oil available for forever, the concentrated oils that's being removed from these vegetables. And all these chronic diseases were rare. But when the other diet, the standard American diet, Western diet, starts entering these cultures, the increase is almost epidemic, to where so much of the earth now is facing the same epidemic that America faces when it comes to the number one killer of people in America is the heart disease, followed by cancer, et cetera, et cetera. And of the top 10 diseases that kill people in the United States, for instance, 9 of them are completely, I should say, mostly controllable by what you eat and what you don't eat. And that means every bite. That doesn't just mean occasionally. So we're talking really two things here. We're talking you and the people like you that have not been diagnosed with chronic disease. You talk about a moderation of diet, and that's commendable. That's very commendable. And it will slow down disease progression within a body. With someone such as myself that has a deadly disease in their body, moderation doesn't work. Many of the diets that are recommended are simply moderation diets that make people feel good and maybe slow down progression of the disease. They don't nip it in the bud, and they certainly don't reverse the disease. That's my passion in teaching people, coaching people, supporting people in doing, is how to actually stop disease in its tracks. You know it's not going to get worse. When you're talking heart disease, you will not have a heart attack. You will stop most of the type of plaque in the arteries that causes heart attack. It won't grow any longer in that matter, and you'll selectively reverse the disease. And when I say stop and reverse, I like to think of that as a healing. Even if the arteries don't open sufficiently to be completely like a newborn child, they're sufficient for sufficient blood flow, and you can last and live into a ripe, healthy old age. So thank you for bringing up the China study. That's a resource.
And David, I loved how you were talking about, when somebody has a serious condition, that the moderation doesn't work. And, from my years of studying nutrition and herbs, the natural way, you really sometimes have to go in pretty strong. Like with herbs, sometimes people will take an herb for 2 weeks and say, oh, yeah, I didn't get any results from that. And what people don't understand is, a pharmaceutical drug is very powerful. And so sometimes people will experience the effects within 5 minutes of taking it. Well, when you take an herb or something in nature isn't as aggressive and forceful. It heals over time. And that's why some people give up too soon on natural remedies, because they didn't go in strong enough. And just like you said with your specific diet, some people might, I'll do it moderately, and they get no results. And again, when you do it the natural way, sometimes you have to go in 100% and let nature do its things. You can't just go into it, with, like they did the pharmaceutical way, one drug cures it all. It's not that way on the natural path.
I completely agree. It takes time. It took time to develop these issues that you require for herbs or to change to a plant-based nutrition. And as my wife, who is an herbalist, loves to tell me, the herbs are food. So there you go. They're plant foods. I completely agree. It's going to take time. I didn't have a support mechanism. My goal in life, my mission in life now is not only to educate, but to help provide a support mechanism for individuals to actually build enough change of lifestyle to it become self-sustaining. I believe even then there's going to be requirements for support, other people to hug on to love on to help encourage people in your family perhaps that join you, people that are friends that join you, or groups that you have to put together to join you, because it's so easy to start back when you're feeling good on things that made you feel bad in the first place. And besides, we have such a mechanism built into us of habit. We have certain tastes. We've built these tastes for our whole lives, and once we've actually discovered that it's the very tastes that have led us into our certain condition, it's a challenge. It's a true challenge, and it's a challenge that every alternative doctor faces and medical doctors face, is how to have someone actually change a lifestyle and make it a permanent change. So I'm here to provide support to others. I'm here also to build in the process my very own support group.
Wow. Well,
that's awesome, David.
Yeah, I really love this perspective, because even from the biological perspective, my background's in biology and physics, and one of the things we were talking about when we were talking about the anatomy of the human body is that the colon and the intestines are actually quite long, which is actually more in line with what you would expect to find in herbivores. And so even though we do have a stomach with hydrochloric acid where we can digest meat, we're really more like opportunistic eaters. And so we're omnivores, really, where we could actually make use of just about anything that we might happen to find in our environment. But the one thing we were learning, though, is that with those long intestines, that we actually are better off with more of a plant-based diet. because the plant-based foods are more alkaline. The meat, when you eat too much of it, actually can get clogged and kind of slow down your digestive system because we have so much intestine that it has to get through. So even though we can make use of the meat, they were pointing out even though they really don't have any kind of a investment in vegetarianism, or they weren't really even teaching health, they were looking at it just from a biological perspective and how the anatomy of the body is made. And I thought that was really interesting too, hearing that perspective of it.
Yeah, it's very interesting as well that you bring up hydrochloric acid in the stomach, and I know that there'll be a break shortly, and maybe after the break we can talk just a little bit about the higher use, if you will, of that hydrochloric acid. So I will leave it at that. And
well, you hit that right on the nose, because actually we are coming up on a break, and so we will be joining.
I was watching the clock.
Excellent. Good work. So we will be coming back with David Matthews, the heart health guy, after the break. Right now, we are coming up on our first break, and during the break, please keep in mind that Truth Frequency Radio, as well as Spirit's Journey, are listener supported, so you can go to the Spirit's Journey page if you would like to help support the station. And so right now, you are listening to Spirit's Journey on Truth Frequency Radio, simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio. We will see you on the other side.
No hate, no hype, no fear. We are DFR, your protection from deception.
We are back from the break. If you were just joining us, this is Spirit's Journey with Patrick and Catherine Andrews, and we are here today with David Matthews, the heart health guy. We're coming to you live on Truth Frequency Radio, simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio. And speaking of live, you can see me this weekend at Ozark Mountain Publishing's What's Your Genre Book and Psychic Festival. That's July 26th, 27th, and 28th. It is in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. So if you are up for a little trip over the weekend, it's a great place to visit if you haven't ever been there, or if it's been a while since you've been there. So you can see me in person. I'll be speaking Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So we are back with David Matthews, the heart health guy. Hey, David.
Well, howdy.
And David is going to be giving us a quiz in a little bit, which is really fun because I thought I knew so much about nutrition, and he actually stumped me on a couple quiz questions we took last week. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with everyone. But before we do that, I had a quick question that came to me as you were talking about, our eating habits, David, and so many people, are stuck in these habits. And last week we had a guest on the show that talked about the power of the subconscious mind and these habits that we are so ingrained with in the subconscious mind. And I wondered, did you use any specific tools or anything to overcome these patterns that you had with your diet and something that could help the listeners maybe?
Well, as you two know, I've had a great deal of background within the metaphysical community myself. And going to 101 metaphysics, as you think, so you become. And so I just put my mind to it. And my daily thought was affirmative. It was an affirmation of, I will heal. I will eat the foods that I now understand will actually cause the healing. And I was so passionate about it, even though I was alone and didn't have a whole lot of direct support. I had support from people, but that weren't doing it along with me, that the manifestation was quite real. And how does one actually cause these changes? Well, if you can get the information, and if you can come to believe the information, and you can weed out all of these conflicting studies and reports that might have bias, or might only be looking at it did do some good about something, some small something or other, and look at the bigger picture, and look at the nature of life and what we've been given here on this earth that's truly processing and without the meats and without the oils and without all these other things. If you come to understand that and you get passionate about it, then you're going to manifest it into your life. You're going to do it. And you're going to keep picking yourself back up every time you don't do it. I don't know. It's just there's a lot that I will be involved in when teaching specificities to your question. But right now, I would just simply say to your audience that it really is find the belief, find the truth, decide whether you want to live, or if you're actually utilizing your disease for some method of escape. And that's a real serious question to ask yourselves. But if you truly do want to live a purposeful, meaningful, mission-filled life, you'll find your way. Just believe it, what you're doing. Truly, truly believe it, then it will become an affirmation.
Yeah, that's no, yeah, that's really good. But I was curious too, like how do you stay on it? And I know you talked about, deciding if you really want to live. I think that's a really good point, because our show is Spirit's Journeys. We're really looking at things from a spiritual perspective, understanding that there's more to us than just a bunch of physical bodies walking around. There's a spiritual dimension to our life. So with that perspective, what do you think the bigger picture is here? What would be the spiritual dimension of this? Why would a disease like this develop? And then, can you speak a little bit more to what you were talking about in terms of the choices that we could make based on that?
There's this passion that's in me. I've heard it in you and Catherine. I've heard it in many other people, and that is to truly find answers, to truly want to know in this world why we're here, what we're doing, where we're going, who we are, how our minds work, what's real, what isn't real, what's rotting away, and what's going to remain permanent. So you can get very deeply into the Eastern mysticism, which I went deeply into for many, many years, and began to see the illusoriness of physicality. You can even go into the newer physics and understand that the things that we see aren't as they appear to be. And so what are we doing in all of this? Why are we here in the first place? And we get kind of drawn in and attached to those things that we believe, those things that we touch. We think of so many things as real that ultimately are not real. They're useful perhaps for the moment, and sometimes that moment lasts a lifetime for people. Unfortunately, they can use things a lot quicker and move on to the next thing and recognize them just as that, something to use and grow and to learn from. Even this diet and eating properly, it has that same type of a dimension to it. It's getting closer to light, getting closer to love. And if I was to say what I would rather be doing and how to become love in the first place, and once as you learn that, how to actually become love, then so many things will want to occur naturally in your life. Your diet will want to clean up. Your relationships will want to clean up. The way you want to give to and serve others will increase. you recognize a continuum, a spiritual continuum. Again, I hope I kind of touched on what you just were asking or talking to me about.
No, yeah, I think you are getting on that point, and I know for myself, looking at the spiritual perspective, there's most of the spiritual traditions have this kind of a concept that we existed before we came into this life, and we will exist in some form after we leave this life, and whether or not we come back again is up for debate. People don't always agree on that, but it seems to be there's a lot of continuity between, an existence before and an existence after. And when I was really looking at that, I realized what that means is we are really eternal beings. We are beings of energy and light. We are coming into this life. We are in mortal bodies. So yes, the body's going to die. And so I don't think that being an immortal being means, oh, well, we can just do whatever we want. You can harm somebody if you want because it doesn't matter. It all comes down to, I think, how we're learning to use our life experiences and learning how to interact with each other. And I think you hit on a really good point there, is learning how to love ourselves and learning how to love each other seems to be a really big foundational lesson that pervades just about every experience that we have. I mean, we see that in our country more now than ever. There's this big kind of a tug of war, and even the people who seem to be claiming, oh, we need to focus more on love, but they're saying it with anger in their heart and in their expression. So it's almost like this dichotomy that's going on where everybody's angry at each other and nobody's listening to each other anymore. So, it's just really interesting that you use that as kind of a foundational point, because I think that's a really good point, that there is this inner work that we do also that goes along with this. It's not just the diet that you eat, right?
Totally agree. You said a moment ago, as I had stated, you learn to love yourself. Well, what's most interesting about that is when you learn to love yourself, and I might have mentioned this a moment ago, you learn that yourself is love, and that becomes your identity. That's how you walk through life. And there's many analogies to love. There's light, there's truth, there's wholeness. There's so many wonderful words. I love the word love. My name is David. I've always loved the thought of beloved, which is what the word David means. I've always identified with love, and the more spiritually aware I became through my life, the more I just settled down in that center of love and accepted that and worked my outworkings from that point. So everyone that's listening, just give yourself a big hug. You're all loved.
Well, and if you don't love yourself, you're not going to take the time to eat correctly and do all these other self-protocols that you need to heal. So, it is totally a foundational piece. And I think I'm ready for the quiz, David, and I bet our listeners are too. You going to shoot us some questions?
Oh, no, a quiz. I'm sweating bullets over here now.
For the sake of time, I may not do all of them, and we may do it a little bit differently than we talked about earlier before the program. So I'm not going to go through a whole lot of quiz questions, but I'm going to use a couple or a few as just kind of starting points to discuss a few ideas that are critical. And the first one I want to come up with, I'll ask the question. It's a multiple choice question, and listeners, you don't have to write down the answer. Just in your mind, what's the answer? And then I'll give you the answer, and then we'll talk about it for a moment. Which of the following molecules supports the greatest arterial D vitamin C? So, if any of you chose C, nitric oxide, you would be absolutely correct. And this comes back to what you were talking about a little while ago, Patrick, in terms of hydrochloric acid in the stomach. And it's there, and it can break down meat, and then the meat can move slowly through the digestive system and wreak havoc in the process, and eventually be excreted from the body. But nitric oxide is key to our health, specifically arterial health, but it is key to our health in every cell of our body. And there is something called, if I can say this correctly, enterosalivary cycle, where the foods that we take in are chewed, combined with our saliva, which is why you must chew your food, swallowed, enter the stomach. If the stomach has sufficient pH, minimum of 4, preferably 3 or even 2, then it creates a cycle. And this cycle is taking deep green leafy vegetables in the body, in the stomach, acid, nitrates return to nitrites. Nitrites return back through a mechanism to the salivary glands, and if you don't spit your saliva out, and if you don't use mouthwash, which destroys the healthy bacteria in the mouth, you have a constant flow of nitric oxide being created through your diet. The inner lining of the arteries to be slippery and healthy. Nothing can stick to it. When you're young, I want to go back to the youthful arteries that I mentioned a little while ago in some capacity. It's been found that even in embryos, even in yet-to-be-born people, that there are beginning streaks of fat being laid down within the arteries. In youth, that streak is still getting worse. Children are already showing signs of heart disease, or specifically atherosclerosis. You go on up to ages, soldiers in Vietnam and Korea, autopsies done showed even a further increase in plaque laid down within the arteries. And as life goes on, 20s, 30s, 40s, people start having symptoms, start having heart attacks, 50s, 60s, 70s. Many people are dead by that point. But what has happened is early in life, you have a natural capability, because the arteries are relatively clear, to the endothelium, that inner lining of the arteries, to produce that nitric oxide, which causes a relaxation of the arteries and a dilation of the arteries, which is a healthy artery. But little by little, decade by decade, as the arteries are filled with levels of plaque, the what's called endothelium dysfunction begins to occur, which simply means that the arteries are no longer as capable of producing naturally nitric oxide, the most important molecule in your body. And it becomes more and more important the older you get that you eat green leafy vegetables, because of the enterosalivary cycle producing nitric oxide through diet when it comes to producing nitric oxide. So that explains a little bit, and that should be eye-opening to most people. Most people think that children are extremely healthy. I would say children are beginning disease, but they are far from symptomatic, and it's very unfortunate.
You know, it's interesting. It's interesting you talk about dark green leafy vegetables, because I remember when I was younger, I couldn't stand them. I think I was typical for most kids. But then as I get older, especially within, I don't know when it started exactly, maybe the last 5 years or so, I've just developed a real craving for kale. It's like I just can't get enough of it. And so I always want to eat that, and even like turnip greens, but just I just feel my body almost like craving these dark greens. So I would take that as a sign. Maybe my intuition is really tuning in to what my body is asking for, would you say?
Well, you're still young, Patrick, but it's certainly not too late to begin being a lot more kale, a lot more turnip greens, and a lot more all of the deep green, all of the colorful deep even they're colorful deep greens. You got red kale as well, and all of the colored vegetables that are available. And I'm going to ask the question, another multiple choice, because I want to mention something here.
Sure.
Which of the following is a heart healthy oil? Coconut oil, olive oil, vegetable oil, or none of the above?
Well, I've always heard olive oil is healthy for you because, they use olive oil a lot in Italy. I kind of have a feeling maybe where you're going with this, though.
I think you already know where I'm going with this. I asked you that question once, and I think you probably remember the answer. Here's our situation. None of the above are heart healthy. Even though canola oil and olive oil are recommended as heart healthy oils, the truth of the matter is all concentrated oils that have been squeezed out of vegetation become very concentrated, and oils cause a vasoconstriction. All oils will cause the arteries to close down. And when you eat the vegetables that the oils are made from, the approximate caloric intake is around 10% of the diet, of the food, whereas concentrated, we all know it's mainly fat. And you find that so many of the recommendations are that we limit our caloric intake to about 30% fat. Most people do far more than 30%. They hit 40 and 50 quite often. But many studies, the studies that I've been involved in looking into, recommend 10% of the fat being diet, 10% of the diet calories coming from fat. So while we've got time, let me do just a few more of these questions.
Sure.
And, there's a few minutes remaining.
Yeah, so we've got about 5 minutes here left.
Exactly. Yeah. I was just looking up at the clock. I'm going to do a true-false.
Okay.
This one is something that's amazing to consider and should get everybody to sit up and take notice. True or false? The way I'm asking it, you'll know the answer. 130 million of today's Americans will die of vascular disease.
I'm going to say true.
Yeah, I wish I could say false, but I think it's true.
Well, I want you to imagine that when we're talking vascular disease, and I want to add a little bit. There wasn't enough line where I wrote it down to really complete the question, or the statement. It's really 130 million of today's Americans will die of vascular disease or related complications. So, vascular disease, your vasculature is your whole system of arteries and veins throughout the body, capillaries, and there are many diseases of the vasculature. One being stroke, another being vascular dementia. There's a great deal of vascular issues with Alzheimer's. There is certainly peripheral artery disease, PAD, which is simply atherosclerosis in the legs and feet. You can also say diabetes is a factor. Certainly, we have not considered directly a vascular disease. That's an amazing statistic. 330 million people live in America today. And what is that? That's over 1/3 will die from a disease or a complication of a disease that was unnecessary to have occurred in the first place. Now, what is that all about? That says something about our culture. That says something about our food industry. That says something about recommendations within the government, within the medical community. That says something about our television advertising. There's something way upside down. We have gone so far from nature that it's 130 million pathetics.
Oh, yeah, I definitely believe.
My mind.
Yeah, the health situation in this country has some troubling trends. Like one thing that I have a big problem with is advertising prescription medications on television. So they're advertising prescription medication to the masses when it's the doctor who has to prescribe it. So I feel like that's something that needs to change in this country. You don't see that other places in the world.
Yes. And in the last remaining moment here, I completely agree with what you just said. I've got two more true false.
Okay, we got about a minute left here, a minute and a half.
Okay, we can get it done. It is advisable for firemen to spray a house fire with gasoline. True or false?
Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and say false on that one.
Okay. Obviously false. My next question, true or false? The toxic American diet is like gasoline to arterial plaque inflammation.
I would say that's true.
True or false?
I would say that's true.
For sure, true.
Okay. I think everybody would know that would be true, just from the way I've asked it and what I've been speaking of. So whenever we eat these things that destroy and damage the endothelium, the inner lining of the arteries, it's exactly the same as throwing a gasoline on a house fire. My advice would be to quit throwing the chemicals into the body, the molecules that will do damage to your body unnecessarily. And with that said, thank you so much. I know we're out of time. Thank you, Patrick and Catherine, and all those listening. I would like to invite those that would, the way to contact me, and I would love you to contact me and offer some guidance from your end, some questions, some ideas. My email is TheWorksofDavid@gmail.com. Simply TheWorksofDavid@gmail.com.
All right. Well, we love having you with us, and so please connect with us on Facebook at Spiritual Journey Radio. Be sure to like our page. You can find out where I'm going to be at whatsyourgenrebookfair.com for this weekend. Goodbye for now.